I'll start by telling you my story. So let me tell you a story about a young man who went to the big city to, as young people do, to try to make it in the big city professionally, in their career, and so forth. And I, that young man was me. So, spoiler alert. But I had a really unique job. I had a job where I interacted with every single level of society, every class, every nationality, uh, from kitchen porter to the dustman to the plumber to middle management to corporate officers to CEOs to the chairman of the biggest investment banks in the world to government officials, politicians, celebrities, and their entourages, even the royal family, and, quote, global elites. It was a very unique job and surprisingly accessible. And it didn't pay extremely well, but it paid well if you worked enough hours. So I observed a lot, I watched a lot. The entry point was through the hospitality industry and the events industry. So you're kind of a fly on the wall for everybody in society. And the more I watched and observed, the more I got very interested in how the machinery of society and the world and politics, I was fascinated how commerce, industry, banking, how this all works, how this thing works, this machinery works, and everybody playing this role in this thing we call society and the world. But I wasn't really politically active. I read a lot. I read a lot of newspapers every week. I'd buy a big stack, buy every single newspaper, from the News of the World to the Guardian, Telegraph, everything in between. There's a big stack. I spent most Saturdays and Sundays going through it over coffee. And then a couple of significant global events took place, which had a profound impact on me in the sense that they pulled me in to become more active. I was pulled off the sidelines of watching what was going on and being informed. One of them was the Second Intifada in Palestine. Now it was late 90s. And before that, my knowledge of Israel and Palestine, the Middle East, was murky at best. Typical American worldview, basically. And then 9/11 happened. And that was also interesting because I was an American in London. So I was removed I was out of the blast zone, if you will, ground zero, not just the World Trade Centers, but ground zero of the propaganda and the gravitational pull in America in terms of propaganda, war. It's powerful. If those of you who have spent time in that country or been there during a major war, you know what I'm talking about. The indoctrination is really powerful. And I was outside of that for 9/11, so that kind of gave me a little bit of breathing space to look at 9/11 from not a safe distance, but a good enough distance. I remember I was working in Hanover Square in London. I was in the head offices of Condé Nast Publications. I just cycled all the way from Fulham, sweaty, to get to work on time. It was September, obviously, but I remember watching it on the screen in one of the meeting rooms, and I was just like, wow, this is incredible. And there's a lot of events like that. Then the Iraq War happened. And that was, that more than anything, the Palestinian issue I've been active on for 25 years. And it's because of my personal connection with that community. I was living in a place they called the Gaza Strip. It's like half of North End Road in Fulham. They called it the Gaza Strip, all Palestinian. And so they were kind of like my surrogate family, became kind of my surrogate family in certain ways. Very welcoming, even though I was American and even though my government was bombing the hell out of the Middle East, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. But But the Iraq War pulled me off the sidelines. I became more active. And I had a business at the time, so I was able to fund, sponsor, to help produce events, create art, music, campaigns, rallies. So I was plugged into the anti-war movement in a big way, as well as the Palestinian movement, peace movement. So I spending more time doing activism than I was doing my job at some point. And I realized that I really can't be doing this double life. And I started this process of getting out of the rat race. And at that time, blogging was becoming a thing. You remember 2003, 4, and 5. So I started blogging and helping out with documentary films with people I met on these anti-war marches. And then the 2 million or the 1.5 million man march happened in London. And we really, everybody out there thought, wow, this is it. We are going to turn this thing around. We're going to send a message to Tony Blair and George Bush. This is not going to happen. Everyone's out there. Christians, Muslims, Jews, the rabbis were out as well. Everybody came out. The trade unionists, everybody came out. Every single nationality, class, they're all out there marching to stop the war in Iraq. Multiple marches. And what happened? What happened? It didn't stop the war. And there was a real feeling of defeat. It was a real loss. And a lot of people were exasperated by that. But it was that defeat that motivated me to step up, and I realized the power of propaganda. I realized why wasn't this successful? Because the propaganda was so powerful that although we had a certain percentage of the population out on the street, it didn't really have an effect on the political class. And the majority of the population were indifferent, if not believing the whole WMD hoax. So a lot of people got motivated from that. Myself, I realized I needed to be in the counter-propaganda effort. So blogging, journalism. I started a website. I met Brian and Mike at the Edge Media, Edge TV. It was raise your hand if you remember Edge TV. This was on Sky. It was a very dangerous and controversial channel that allowed people to get on that couldn't before. So that's kind of how I got into. I went to art college. I didn't go to journalism school. I went to art college. I was art and design. And later I did my master's in international relations as a mature student in my late 40s, a few years ago at Plymouth University. So the thing people were asking me here and constantly is what are we doing now? And I think this event, other festivals, everything kind of launched out of the COVID lockdown tyranny, if you will. It activated people that weren't red-pilled before, that weren't politically active. And my personal opinion is we won the argument on lockdowns. We won the argument on vaccines. We won the battle. Okay, it was a difficult battle, and many people were injured and suffered during that. But in the end, we won the argument, politically speaking. But what do you do now when the crisis is over? And that's the question a lot of people were asking me last night. What do you do now? How do I get active? How do I make a difference? And I think that's an individual conversation that everybody has. You know, do you want to get involved in do you want to launch a website? Do you want to get more involved in media? Do you want to be a social media activist? All of the above, great. Do you want to be active in your community? Do you just want to stick your middle finger up at the system and give it some of that punk rock energy and big, you know what, to the system? Events like this are an act of protest. There's many of these festivals. You have the Light newspaper. You have UK Column, what we do. These are all great. In your communities, there's plenty of things that people can do. Just the choices you make are an act of protest or a dissident act. That's up to everybody to decide how active they want to be. Myself, I had certain skills, I had certain capabilities, so I just thought I would apply my skills, and whatever my skills were at the time, that I would apply those to try to somehow change the conversation, to reclaim the conversation. And there's no guarantee you're going to be successful. 2 million people out on the streets could not stop the Iraq War. But it's funny, August 2013, there was another war beckoning. It was a war against Syria, and nobody came out on the street. And you know why? Because Stop the War Coalition was probably, some people in that organization were in favor of a war on Syria, because they wanted to oust Assad. So they didn't really rally the troops. They did at the last minute, and I think 20 or 15,000 people showed up at Downing Street. You remember that? August. And they put out a fake film on the BBC called Saving Syria's Children, right before the vote in Commons, to really capture and manufacture consent for this war. But something funny happened before that. A flood of letters hit MPs' offices all across the country. And this created a little bit of a shockwave in Westminster. They weren't expecting that. The people didn't spell it in the street, but the people who were engaged, directly engaged with the system, and let it be known to their representatives that they were not on board with this. And that vote failed by the slimmest of margins. The slimmest of margins. Tiny. And I was shocked. We all thought, I remember, we all thought it was going to be a slam dunk, and America was going to go in right behind them, just like they did with Iraq. And it didn't happen. So what happened there is people, I think a collection of activists, media people, different, very motley crew, somehow got the word out that they needed to get engaged on this. And it made a difference at that time. And you might say, well, it didn't make a difference because look what happened this past December when Jolani rolled into Damascus, black flags flying over Damascus. Maybe so, but you know, you can't, the war, you have to look at it along an extended timeline. You know, the Palestinians aren't going to win their war in one generation. They'll probably be fighting that for multiple generations. So, you know, if we expect that we're always going to get a result immediately, it might not happen in your lifetime. But I think it's important that you're engaged. You're engaged, because being engaged says a lot about who you are and what you're doing here. And what I'm doing here is I want to apply the abilities that God gave me to the best of my ability to try my best to make the world a better place, or about the issues that I care about. That's my mission. And everybody, I think, can take a cue that they have their own mission, whatever your worldview is. Everybody has skills and capabilities, and everybody in some way, on some level, can apply them. And many hands make light work. Many hands make light work. So that's my idealistic answer. But me, myself, I'm just a single blade of grass. But as they say in Zen, a single blade of grass can crack a concrete block. And it does. And there's so many examples of this. Every single major effort, movement, campaign always started with one person. Always with one person. Every great idea with one person. So don't a lot of people want to feel disempowered, like, oh, what can I do? Everybody can do something. And the results sometimes take years to manifest. But you have to start somewhere. And you just have to have faith that that process is universal and it will always happen. How are we doing on time? How much time has passed? 17 past. Okay. So one of the issues that people are concerned about, I think, is a potential endgame scenario is the digital ID issue, and also digital cash. This is a potential endgame scenario for obvious reasons. The CBDC, central bank digital currency, that very close to being implemented during the COVID crisis, very close, had to be delayed. But like so many of these things, delayed. Delaying something is a major victory. Wars are won with small victories. Small battles win wars. And to delay the agenda, to delay the establishment agenda is a major victory, especially if it's being done at a grassroots level. But we're living in a kind of crisis economy where these cycles are based on crises. COVID and lockdown is one of those. Now the crisis is over. Some people need to refocus. Some people might not want to be active. That was the issue that they're passionate about, that affected them directly, the vaccine issue, or people lost their businesses during COVID. And that's fine. And some people are still fighting that, still trying to get justice for people who are vaccine injured. And that's also important. What I do is maybe slightly different. My issues are different. My interests are different. My expertise is different. But it's, what everyone's doing collectively is no less valid than even, the biggest geopolitical stories. Not everybody needs to engage in these issues. Most things are happening on a local level. But Charles and Mike brought up a really important point, is that the legislation that the government's putting in is becoming increasingly authoritarian. And if you look at major dissident events from the 80s till now, the Battle of the Beanfields, Stonehenge, perfect example. Government comes in heavy-handed. It's later proven that they falsified evidence or witness testimonies. The government has to row it back, but the legislation gets ramped up. The Public Orders Act, the Criminal Justice Bill, Orgreaves, the miners' riots, that similar thing. Miscarriage of justice, perverting the course of justice on the part of the government, compensations paid out to protesters who were wrongly imprisoned and so forth, years later, but the legislation gets ramped up. The other one was a few years ago, the Kill the Bill, the police crime sentencing and courts bill, very much related to the anti-fracking movement. You remember the anti-fracking movement? It seems like a long time ago, but it was just yesterday. That was a total grassroots effort. A few people drove that movement nationally. One of them we knew very well, Ian R. Crane. Literally one man in the back of a trailer with a few activists holding back the richest man in Britain, the CEO of INEOS. Is it Jim Ratcliffe? Jim Ratcliffe. So what Ian called Jerry activists, people who were retired, who had all the time in the world to commit, a literal handful of people stopped the richest man in Britain from putting drill bits into the ground. It is one of the most successful grassroots activist efforts ever. A relative handful of people. I mean, how is that even possible in this day and age? But that happened. And the government's reaction was to ramp up the legislation, to clamp down on freedom of assembly. The other one is the Palestine Action issue, which is really important. This is the perversion of the Terrorism Act of 2000 to lower the bar for what's considered terrorist activity. And look, I'm not a fan of Just Stop Oil. I don't really agree with the campaign. It's nonsensical in certain ways. But some of those activists just got a 44-month sentence, I think, for 150 pounds worth of damage to a frame of some sign. I don't know what it was. But I don't necessarily support that organization completely, but I will defend them, even though I have nothing in common with them in terms of my ideological viewpoints and on that issue of climate change, for instance, or electric cars. Nothing in common, but I will defend them to the hilt. And that's the attitude. We need to focus on the rights and not the politics per se, and really not the ideological issue. But look at what you have in common. And the Palestine Action issue, whether you agree with, as my colleague said before, whatever your feeling is with Israel and Palestine, it's neither here nor there. This is a rights issue. It's a basic rights issue. So, and the other one is the immigration. On the back of the immigration crisis, and I say with the air quotes, crisis, are people talking about, well, a good solution to this will be the digital ID system, of course. So you have another crisis being used. The state doesn't care. It doesn't care about the working class. It doesn't care about the middle class. It cares about itself and how to subdue and take away rights incrementally. And everything I've just mentioned, every single major historical event has corresponded with the withdrawing of certain rights, basic rights that before was legal is now illegal. It's a pattern, it's undeniable. So we have a saying in basketball, play the man, not the ball, in defense. Watch your man. I was always taught, watch the waist of the man you're guarding, and don't watch the ball, and don't pay attention to ball fakes. Keep your eye on the man. The man is your rights. The ball is the media, is the divisive, emotive issues like immigration. They want to get us. The government love when we're fighting each other, or people are fighting people. As long as we're not fighting them, as long as we're not paying attention to Westminster, they absolutely love it. The media will ramp up this issue, and of course they'll be there with the solution. And many people will welcome that solution, unfortunately. So those are a few things I just want to leave with you. And Charles brought up something interesting about the Holocaust education. I just have to add that as a caveat. So in America, just to tell you where that's headed, so I went to primary school and junior high school in America in the late 70s, early 80s. And my 13 years old, year 8 in America, half the year was spent on the Holocaust and reading and talking about Anne Frank's diary. And I went to a state school. And before that, when I was 9 and 10, we had to learn kibbutz songs in choir, Israeli settler songs. This is in Boston, Massachusetts, very liberal. So that's how most Americans, most Americans go to state schools, so many Americans will get that mandatory Holocaust education. This is for the last 50 years. So if you look at American politics and people talk about the lobby and why is America so loyal to Israel, the answer is simple. Because you learn from a very young age that Israel is our greatest friend and ally, and we must support them no matter what. So I'll say something controversial now. If they want to make Holocaust education mandatory in British schools, I'm all for that. However, only if they also make, side by side with that, they'll make also mandatory education about Israel's genocide in Gaza. And then the children will get a real education. They will see the irony of history, and they will really learn the historic lesson, that lesson that society and those children really need to learn. I'm all for that. I think that would be great. But not one, needs to be both. That's fine. Or neither. It's either both or it's nothing. But I think that would definitely change the next generation. I think they're changed already. But that's where I would stand on that. So that's all I had to say today on that. But I'm open to talking to people outside the tent, as I normally do. I'm happy to talk. We have a few minutes for a Q&A. Yeah, so we got a few questions from the audience. Be happy to.
Any questions? Come on. Someone must have a question. Patrick, just going back to your, I think that point on your schooling, it's completely fascinating. And actually, it does remind me to point out that on the UK Column website, Brian has recently recorded an interview with a British Jewish lady called Lynn Salcedo, and she goes back into her childhood, which was considerably before that, but also the idea of, well, I suppose indoctrination would be the best word. But do you, obviously thinking about that in retrospect is fascinating, do you remember at the time there being any reaction to the way it was taught?
No, we were just kids. So whatever our teacher tells us is the way the world is. Yeah. And that's that. And it was just another country. And I think possibly our choir teacher was Jewish. I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
I think maybe she was. But yeah, we didn't think anything of it. It's just part of the background of life growing up in America.
Yeah. Fascinating. Good. Well done.
Hi. You said the next generation had changed. In what way? And can you give examples?
Well, I think it's kind of obvious when you look at polling and you look at social media activity. I think it was the former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was pulling his hair out because they spent 125 million to put the Israeli narrative on social media after October 7th, and there were more pro-Palestinian posts on TikTok and Instagram by a ratio of 16 to 1. And they didn't spend any money. The kids didn't spend any money. They didn't need orders from head office. But the U.S. and Israel probably collectively have spent, I would say, more than $500 million on seeding narratives and propaganda.
So are you just talking about in relation to Israel or other matters such as CBDC, vaccines, changes in the law, rights, censorship, etc.?
Well, I think most of what kids will believe, and most people go with what their parents have taught them or showed them, or they'll go by the example of their parents. And if you look at the vaccine numbers for the second and third and fourth jabs, it just tails off and flatlines to a ridiculously low level. So that means most parents, even what we call normies, have abandoned the COVID vaccine and don't believe in it, or at the very least question it. And so their children will, if that's the data for adults, I would say at least the reflection in the kids will be the same. As I said before, we absolutely won the argument on that. There's no doubt about that. The polling shows that. The uptake shows that. So I think, yeah. CBDC's more complicated. That's a good conversation. Kids are so enamored with the convenience of touch payments and and all that. So that's a difficult one because we're from the pre. I mean, I remember what it was like with before mobile phones, and most of us, many of us in here do, and we know what it was like before the internet. Before those sort of things. So kids now, younger kids, they don't know what it's like when it was cash only. They don't know what it's like when there were no mobile phones, before text messaging. That's a tricky conversation. I don't know. It could swing in an interesting way that we can't predict in terms of the attitude, but that's certainly something to be very concerned about, especially looking at Scandinavia. So 90% of all transactions are done electronically now. 90%. In Sweden specifically, and I think this country is probably not far behind on the curve. So that's a good discussion to have. It's a big discussion actually, and not an easy one, I'm afraid.
So I think the days that we should look at, because you're here, mainly because you're here, is that they don't want to introduce the Holocaust Day, but the most relevant day probably to most people would be contrasting 4th of July celebration and why that happened and what the British did then, so knowing what colonialism looks like, and then seeing how every empire does the same thing. So whether it's the Romans or it's you guys now or whoever has hegemony of whatever's going to happen next. So people can look at it with one lens and going, you can spot the propaganda because the subdued people have no rights and get all their stuff taken and get killed, and the hegemony is always right. But you can spot it, and if you teach that in school, then you go, okay, well, are we for this or are we not for this?
What's your question?
So, well, the question was, instead of the Holocaust Day, shouldn't we look into having the 4th of July Day? Because culturally, you're more similar than Israel is to us.
Well, that's interesting. You're assuming that the Americans defeated the British in 1776. Did they? I think what happened was the relationship changed, and think of it like the Anglo-American Empire, because that's what it is. It's an Anglo-American-led global hegemon. City of London, Wall Street, Washington, D.C., 3 city-states. Britain's the brains, America's the muscle. America could not do what it does in the world without Britain, and it in many ways benefits from the British colonial network, which is still very much in place. And Britain is more of a Pax Britannia than U.S. is Pax Americana. Britain has more in common with the Roman Empire because of language, legal frameworks, maritime law, shipping and commerce. Those was all British systems, and it was competing with France. Napoleon had his vision of what the legal, Napoleonic law, and that was something they wanted to evangelize around the world, and were unsuccessful. Britain was successful, so America is riding on the back of that as an English language, English-speaking country, and so. You can't separate. I don't think you can really separate the two. There might be some superficial political arguments about Trump and, intelligence services trying the Steele dossier and so forth. But at the end of the day, Britain's always there to whip America into position on foreign policy. They were in Ukraine. They were in Iraq. Skripal, all of these things. They all serve the same ends, which is. And when the Republicans were wavering on Ukraine, they sent Boris Johnson over to crack the whip. And of course, the Americans, when the British come over and do speaking tours or show up at think tanks, and Americans are like, "Oh, the British are here. Oh, great!" They love it. Oh, ex-prime minister, he must be like the cream of the crop. Really, Boris is there with the shirt tail out. It's sad, but it's true. Tony Blair arrives in Washington. They roll out the red carpet. He doesn't get the red carpet here, but he will get it in America. So, but that's kind of how things are rolling, and so Britain's much more vociferously anti-Russian than America is naturally, but the establishment needs Britain to play that role to kick America into touch, and I think that's what Russiagate was about. Because although it demonized Trump and made him into a Russian asset, at the end of the day, it made Trump become more of an anti-Russian president in terms of sanctions, giving lethal aid to the Ukraine before Biden. Trump set the stage for the Ukrainian war. And he says, "Oh, it's not my war. This isn't my war. This is Biden's war. Nothing to do with it. Biden's war. I'm just here to break up the fight." It's total BS. Trump did everything to ramp that war up. Biden took it and made it go live, and now Trump is doing nothing to stop it, quite frankly. There's no change on the ground between Biden and Trump. So you have the political theater on the surface, but below the policy is consistent. So just, again, play the man, not the ball.
Yeah, I've been on this journey for quite a while, like most of us. It occurred to me the other day, we're in a fight, obviously, but what are we fighting for? What is the end game of where we're trying to head? Because most of the younger generation want everything like it is. They want progressive. They want multicultural societies. They want, no, not all of us, but we're talking about a large majority of the people don't want what we're trying to hold on to.
I think if the agenda is going in a direction that you don't want it to go in, sometimes, to get in front of a juggernaut and stop a juggernaut like this is near impossible, unless you're willing to die for these rights. And if it's a question of dying for your rights or making adjustments in your life, 9,999 people out of 10,000 are going to make adjustments. That's just a fact. But you can build parallel systems. You can do parallel events. You can have parallel communities, and you can do that simultaneously. And you break away civilization, and there are many breakaway civilizations. I'm going to one in a couple of weeks in Serbia, Liberland, It's a sort of self-declared semi-autonomous oblast in Serbia that is populated by anarchists. So, and they're having a conference in a couple weeks. So, it's just a small example, but more basically, you can do things in your community. You can do commerce. You can do things. You can. The cash issue is obviously massive for that, but parallel systems, parallel businesses, parallel organizations. UK Com is a parallel civilization next to the mainstream media. It's running parallel, but it's not on the same track at all. And it has a different audience. It has a different way of doing things. Has a different worldview. It's completely different. Two totally separate worlds. So how did that start? With a pamphlet? With a one-page pamphlet? You know, so.
Right. What are your thoughts on a man of peace bombing Iran?
The man of peace. Are you talking about 47? Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, Americans like Mr. Trump, don't they?
He wants he's desperate for the Nobel Peace Prize. We all know that. He's made no secret about it. He really wants that bad. And he's going to bomb his way to that prize. I mean, it's I think the theater of it, the vaudeville aspect of it is so crazy. It's like I'll talk about on the news program, but the Nord Stream sabotage. I mean, talk about a vaudeville show. That is incredible. I mean, it's because he's not a man of peace. I mean, he's not a man of peace. I think at this point, if you still think Donald Trump is a man of peace, then no, I'm speaking rhetorically. I can't help you at that point. There's nothing I can say. I have, if you follow my work for the last 7 months, I have said pretty much everything that can be said on that topic. So, I mean, listen, Donald Trump ran, and this is the lesson. I'll give you an actual valuable lesson, okay? Especially about U.S. politics. Every single president since George W. Bush in 2000 has run on a peace anti-war platform. George W. Bush was no nation building. That gave him the edge. There's some key demographics in the U.S. Electoral map. They're called bellwether counties, okay? And some of them are people who are European Protestant, Norwegian Americans, for instance, northern Wisconsin, Minnesota, and so forth. Whoever takes those bellwether counties generally wins the election. And some of those key demographics are pacifist. And so you have to, if Republicans play to those demographics, they have a good chance of winning the election. George W. Bush did on a no nation building platform. Won. Barack Obama comes in 2008. On day one, I'm going to bring the troops home, he said. And of course, bring them home from Iraq. We don't want our boys over there. So a lot of people are like, yeah, this is awesome. This guy's great. And they all voted for him. He won by a landslide. And did he do that? No. He started 7 new wars in 2 terms. And then Trump comes in 2016. Hillary Clinton, the warmonger. Donald Trump saying, we don't want any wars. We don't want bring them home. Bring them home. I'm going to bring them home. Quite frankly, I don't know what we're doing. Crooked Hillary wants to send the boys. I don't want to. So, and what happened? They say Donald Trump didn't start any new wars. That's a lie. Donald Trump deployed troops to Syria, and they stayed, and they helped to topple the government just this past December. The U.S. have occupied since 2017. Donald Trump ramped up the war against Yemen. The United States was running a proxy war with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Trump did that. Trump gave lethal aid to the Ukrainians when Obama wouldn't. Even Obama wouldn't go that far. Trump yanked the Iran nuclear deal and set the table for World War III. Donald Trump did that. So, but the marketing was no new wars, Trump's a peace president, whatever. The point is he ran on it and won. That gave him the edge. Biden, 2020 election, it's a bit of an anomaly. It was a COVID year. They had George Floyd riots in the summer. It was a mess. I don't even know if Biden actually won. There's so much questions on election fraud in multiple states. But let's just put that off to the side. Trump runs again in 2024 saying, I'm going to end this war in 24 hours. One phone call. One phone call. Sleepy Joe couldn't do it. I'm going to do it. You know, quite frankly, nobody else could do it but me. So that's and guess what? He won. We said it can't get worse than Biden. I mean, Joe was just like, you know, smelling salts. And so we a lot of Americans took a punt on Trump again because they're like, oh, well, if he does what he says he's going to do, then we're at least going to avoid World War III. That was the level of the thought, okay? It turns out it's worse. He's taken Biden's baton and done it even worse. So what the message is, the people don't want war, but the political class will get it. Even if you vote them in on an anti-war ticket, the swamp, the machine will mold that candidate and put him into position to the point where he's on a fait accompli, the road to war. That's the lesson. There's a big difference between what we think, and even beyond this tent, mainstream people don't want war generally. But if they get strong-armed into it, then they tend to go along with it. You get groupthink and the madness of crowds, like COVID is another example. As a type of a war. But that's the point. That's the point. And this bait and switch happens so often. I just gave you, 4 presidents in the last 25 years? Same exact thing. And the polling shows it as well. That's the main lesson. That's the main lesson. I hope that answers your question somewhat.